Hello to all my dear followers. I'd like to welcome you to a new chapter of What if Naruto trains to become a Genjutsu master alongside Kurenai? At the top right of the screen, I've left a card with a playlist showing all the chapters of this fanfic in order. Please, I ask for your likes and comments so I can bring you more chapters. Without further ado, enjoy.
Naruto was acutely aware that there was an intruder in his house the moment he felt himself rise from his sleep into a semi-aware state. Lately, he had been neglecting his sensor while he was within Konoha, and he had berated himself about that. As such, he took a moment, with his eyes still closed, to study the chakra he assumed the entity had. He was slightly surprised when he realized that he couldn't feel much in his search of the chakra presence. This meant one of two things. The first, and most likely, Naruto thought to himself, reason behind this would be that a civilian had picked the lock and was ransacking his apartment quietly. While this wasn't a common occurrence, in fact only an occurrence that would happen once every few months, it was not something Naruto could completely disregard. The second would be an assassin with the same capabilities in hiding his chakra signature as Jiraiya. This was an alarming thought, the thought of an assassin capable of matching Jiraiya's, as of yet unmatched, spying capabilities would be a cause for worry for not only Naruto but all of Konoha. There was a reason Jiraiya was Konoha's spy master. Of course, if it was an assassin on such a level, it would be questionable about why Naruto had managed to detect him before he reached his bedroom. Naruto hoped that it was the civilian whom was in his house, but he couldn't afford to act as if he weren't in danger. Naruto's subtlety shifted himself as he gripped the kunai underneath his pillow. When he heard the person approach his bed, Naruto quickly flipped himself off of his bed, allowing himself to land behind his intruder, and lunged at the person's back. Naruto felt a thrill of fear rush through him as the person in front of him quickly turned and grasped his hand. Kunai inches away from the person's chest as the person stared down at him. "Hello to you too, Naruto." Jiraiya's voice floated to Naruto between his haze of adrenaline and fear. Naruto's eyes quickly jumped up, and through the darkened room, picked out the spiky hair and shining eyes of his master. He quickly fell limp, his guard dropping as he let his kunai dangle in his grip. "Morning, Jiraiya," Naruto said as he looked at his master through the dim light of his room. Naruto quickly narrowed his eyes as he looked over at the clock on his nightstand. "What the hell are you doing here at 6 in the morning, Jiraiya? I doubt you don't know about my party last night," Naruto asked, a little incensed at how early he had been woken from his peaceful sleep. Jiraiya frowned. This immediately let Naruto know that this meeting was not a friendly checkup, but that Jiraiya had something to tell him, or he needed him for something. Naruto knew this because if it had just been Jiraiya trying to annoy him, the man would have acted like a pervert, most likely alluding to some dream he had interrupted, the thought of which caused Naruto to twitch when images from one of those dreams floated across his mind. Though he was no closer to figuring out exactly why he had those dreams, he did know that he had them occasionally. "I have a mission, Naruto," Jiraiya finally said. When Jiraiya did not elaborate, Naruto scoffed as he took his hand from Jiraiya's grip. "How long you gonna be away?" Naruto asked curiously. "I don't know, probably longer than a month," he said as he looked at Naruto, noticing his apprentice's frown. "I'm tracking someone very slippery down," he explained. Naruto waited again, expecting Jiraiya to explain further why he had told him this, but Jiraiya just stood there, still looking at him as if he were waiting for something. "Well, what did you need to tell me for?" Naruto asked. "I knew this was what was going to happen with your job as Konoha's only Sannin. I'll have to wait until you return to get more training." Naruto sighed. "I'll work on refining my Genjutsu a bit more." Jiraiya blinked. "Gaki, I told you because you're coming with me," he said as if it was the most obvious thing. Naruto himself blinked in surprise before he felt a flash of annoyance. "Again?" he asked exasperatedly. "I haven't had a break in almost 2 weeks," Naruto said as he thought back. The Chunin exams, the invasion, that bandit camp, and now this. "Is Gigi trying to kill me by overworking me?" he asked rhetorically. Jiraiya chuckled. "As much fun as it is to see you complaining, Naruto?" Naruto glared at him. "I'm taking you with me to train you a bit while I travel. I won't be traveling fast, so we'll have some time," he explained. Naruto calmed slightly. "Plus, the actual threat on this mission is probably less than if you stayed in the village, so I think I'm giving you a vacation," he said as he stuck his nose in the air as if he was worthy of praise. Naruto scoffed lightly before grinning. Fine, fine. I get it, Jiraiya. When do we leave? He asked, though he was loath to part from Kurenai after his recent brush with death. He knew he needed to get stronger. Besides, he couldn't always stay with her even if he was in Konoha. He had also planned on reacquainting himself with his friends and, now former, team. Unfortunately, this took precedence. In an hour, get cleaned up and meet me at the gate packed for a month, Jiraiya said. Before he disappeared, Jiraiya leaned down, grinning wildly at his apprentice. Say bye to Kurenai-chan for me, he said as he wiggled his eyebrows, disappearing in a shunshin to avoid Naruto's fist. Naruto huffed slightly as he grinned. Naruto had been surprised when Jiraiya hadn't batted an eye at his relationship with Kurenai, at least when Jiraiya revealed he knew about it anyways. Naruto had been trying to keep it hidden, but Jiraiya had quickly picked up on the young man's feelings and known that Kurenai did nothing to stop his glances, even returning a few when she thought Jiraiya hadn't been looking. Jiraiya had told Naruto, simply, "If you two think you can work out, I hope you do." He then proceeded to train Naruto as before. It was a reprieve for Naruto to know he could ask Jiraiya about his relationship if he was desperate. Only if he was desperate, as Jiraiya was still a perverted man. Still, smiling slightly, Naruto set about getting ready for his next mission. Scene break. Naruto and Jiraiya were entering a town about 5 hours travel away from Konoha. The two had traveled as shinobi for close to 3 hours before taking a more sedate pace on the dirt road they now entered the town upon. Naruto had sent 2 Kage Bunshin to inform both Kurenai and Yoshino about his departure. Needless to say, neither had been happy, leaving both clones of Naruto to a stern talking to about accepting missions without any downtime, from Yoshino, and about how Kurenai wasn't happy he wasn't resting after his recent mission. He winced slightly when Kurenai had told him they would talk when he returned, before curtly dispelling his clone. "All right, Naruto. I think I should warn you about one of the 3 vices of shinobi," Jiraiya said as they stopped just inside the village's limits. Naruto could see many signs like the ones on the places near his apartment in Konoha, along with signs that pointed to casinos. Naruto was wary about what Jiraiya was saying. It already reeked of some plan for Jiraiya to pull a fast one on him. "Now, how much money do you have on you?" he asked. Naruto twitched lightly before pulling out his wallet and checking his money. "About 5,000 ryu." "Why?" he asked. Jiraiya grinned. Naruto narrowed his eyes. "Good." All of a sudden Naruto felt his wallet disappear from his hands before 3,000 ryu appeared in Jiraiya's hands. "This will teach you to honor the first vice of shinobi, greed. I expect you to have at least 1,500 ryu once we are ready to leave," he said as he turned and headed away from Naruto, towards one of the glaring neon signs. "I'm going hunting for information. Meet me here in 3 hours," Jiraiya said as he chuckled perversely before disappearing into the crowd. Naruto glared at the non-existent back of his master. Looking at his depleted wallet sadly, he sighed before walking into the town. Despite Naruto's slow walk because of his bad mood, it didn't take Naruto long to reach the other side of the village. He blinked when he realized that he was now looking into an empty plain with one dusty road on it leading out of the village. When Naruto turned around, he was met with the glaring neon sign of a Ryu note with the name of Silver Kunai Casino underneath it. Shrugging his shoulders, Naruto headed into the establishment. Scene break. Half an hour later, Naruto stepped out of the casino, looking at his wallet with a dumbfounded look on his face. Naruto slowly looked back at the casino before a wide grin split his face as he turned back and counted the 50,000 ryu now inside his wallet. Naruto had lost his money quickly at the beginning of his trip, losing close to 1,200 ryu before he understood the game well enough and turning his luck around, and was now rolling in more money than he knew what to do with. Deciding to feed his empty stomach, Naruto headed to the closest restaurant he could find. Taking his time and enjoying his meal, Naruto enjoyed his dinner and a leisurely walk back towards where Jiraiya had left him. Naruto was counting his winnings after having spent some on his lavish dinner. Naruto was still wealthier than he ever remembered. Naruto heard giggling coming from his left, and he looked up with a curious expression on his face as he saw women, many of whom looked like the ones from Konoha that live around his home, giggling while pointing at him. He looked down at his clothes, wondering if he had dropped something on his clothes. When his inspection was finished, and he determined he was free of spots, he looked back to the women. His confusion only increased when he noticed that they were now looking at him with a shy look. It confused Naruto, but he couldn't understand their actions. So, he scratched his head as he decided he would ask these women if they knew where Jiraiya was, since he was supposed to have been around this area. Walking over to them, his confusion increasing as they seemed excited about the fact he was now coming over to them. "Excuse me, but have you seen a tall, white-haired, perverted old man walking around near here?" he asked politely. He figured those were the traits of Jiraiya that others would notice. 3 of the women giggled as they crowded around him, quickly isolating him from the other women looking at him. He gave them a small smile as he waited for an answer to his question. "Oh, you know Jiraiya-sama?" one of the women asked. Naruto blinked in surprise at the tone of the woman's voice but nodded in confirmation. Naruto felt slightly uncomfortable as he felt the 3 of them raking his body over with their stares. He had always been capable of feeling the stares of others when he had been in Konoha, and despite the fact that he was familiar with hateful stares, or even indifferent ones, he felt these stares held something he couldn't quite understand. If Naruto had to explain it, he felt more like a piece of meat than Naruto, the pariah. "Well, follow us, young master." Again, Naruto was struck with an uncomfortable feeling as he listened to the other woman speak, and the 3 women entwined themselves into his arms. "And we shall take you to the master," she finished as she batted her eyes at him from under his arm. Uncomfortable, but unable to think of a way to extricate himself from the women now standing close to him, Naruto was led into the establishment and through a hallway near the back of the open room they entered initially. It was eerily silent down the hallway Naruto was walking, but the women around him constantly flattered their eyelashes at him as they led him further into the building, running havoc across his mind as he tried to comprehend what exactly was going on. Naruto felt he was missing something, but the sound of giggling brought him from his introspection. He looked forward, noticing that one of the women had opened a door. He stepped through the doorway, thankful that the doorway didn't allow for him to bring any of the women under his arms as they quickly let him enter first. When he walked into the room, however, Naruto frowned as he looked at his obviously drunk master. Jiraiya was surrounded by 3 women of his own. His hands were obviously busy as one was resting on one woman's leg, while another was rubbing one woman's breast on top of her kimono. Naruto took about 1 second to contemplate the situation that Jiraiya was in before leaping forward. "Pervert!" he yelled as his hand came down on top of Jiraiya's head. Jiraiya's reaction was just as fast. His hands left the bodies of the women surrounding him as he turned to his attacker. He grinned blearily as he saw Naruto. "Ah, Naruto. There you are," he said drunkenly. Naruto paid no attention to him as he looked at the women Jiraiya had been fondling. "Are you okay, miss?" he asked, concern in his eyes and voice evident as he shot a glare at Jiraiya. "I'm sorry for him. I'll just take him home now," he said. Unfortunately for Naruto, he was only confused as the woman in front of him giggled disarmingly, and her eyes twinkled as she looked at Naruto. "Such a gentleman," she said lightly. The rest of the women giggled as well. Naruto blinked again before looking around, now knowing he was missing something. "Damn Naruto," he said as he looked at the roll of Ryu now sticking out of his apprentice's pocket. "I didn't know you could score such money so fast," he commented, all traces of drunkenness gone from his voice as he leered perversely at the 3 women he had entered with. "Nor that you were such a player, don't you have Kurenai-chan at home, you naughty boy?" Jiraiya teased. Naruto blinked, looking at Jiraiya with confusion. "What are you talking about?" he asked as he stood and folded his arms in frustration. "They were just taking me to see you." He missed the look of disappointment that flashed across the 3 women's eyes. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes at Naruto, looking at him critically. "Don't play around, Naruto. These young ladies were sure to give you a good time," he said jovially, his eyes lighting up with a perverse look. "Even with Kurenai-chan at home, I didn't know you had it in you." Naruto stomped the ground almost like a petulant child. "I told you, I wasn't doing anything but finding you." "What the hell do you mean a good time?" he asked, looking at the women he had arrived with. "They were just being nice to me like all the women around my house in Konoha," he explained. Jiraiya looked at the women, understanding their shocked looks and sighing deeply. Damn, Naruto, are you serious? He asked, all traces of jolly erased now. Of course I'm serious. What the hell are you talking about? Naruto asked angrily. Jiraiya shook his head as the women looked on in confusion and slight disgust. Have you never had the health talk in the academy? Jiraiya asked. Naruto shook his head. I was kicked out of the class. I'm sure you know why. He said. I still don't know what this has to do with anything. He said as the looks of disgust turned to shock and pity. Come on, Naruto. Leave these women about 12,000 Ryu for what you just did, and I'll explain it in our hotel room. He said as he stood up, to the slight disapproval of the women near him. Naruto was even more confused, but, seeing Jiraiya's expression, he peeled the bills from his winnings and handed 2,000 Ryu to each woman before following Jiraiya out of the room and then the building. When the two had made it to their hotel room, Naruto opened his mouth to interrogate Jiraiya about what he was talking about when Jiraiya spoke. Sit down on the bed, Naruto. You should have received this talk almost 2 years ago at this point, and the fact that the Academy nor Kakashi nor Sarutobi-sensei has rectified this mistake is abhorrent. I will be speaking with all of them to fix this. If I hadn't caught on to this and assumed you were just playing ignorant, then you would have been a serious security risk. Do you understand, Naruto? Naruto nodded, having rarely seen such a serious look on Jiraiya's face. Now then, what do you know about the birds and the bees? Jiraiya asked. Such began the most embarrassing talk Naruto would ever have with his new master. Although, the discovery of wet dreams and mourning would being a healthy occurrence of his body was a welcome relief. Naruto was blushing thoroughly by the time Jiraiya had been finished. Though Naruto didn't know it, Jiraiya had not been acting perverted during this talk. Knowing that what Naruto was learning would play a big part of his future relationship or relationships, he had stuck to most of the facts but had not been trying to hide anything like a normal parent might. He had told Naruto everything he needed to know and some information that he didn't but would find useful. Once Jiraiya was satisfied, Naruto knew what he needed. Now, I know this is embarrassing, Naruto, but it is and will become a part of your life at some point if you wish to have a family. I know that you don't know everything, so if you have any questions at any time, don't hesitate to ask. Okay? He finished with a gentle smile. Naruto nodded. Thanks for the talk, Ero Sennin. Naruto said as he sat on his bed, thinking and remembering how often he had wondered what people were alluding to and how he now understood many of the things that had been implied. While he was terribly embarrassed about the talk and the resulting revelations, Naruto was thankful Jiraiya had informed him of what was happening before he had done something embarrassing for Kurenai or himself. Well, I couldn't find any information on who I'm looking for here, so we will move on tomorrow. Get a good night's sleep. Jiraiya said as he prepared for bed himself. Scene break. It had been 3 weeks since Naruto and Jiraiya had left Konoha and Naruto's subsequent adult education. Naruto was quickly growing tired of the constant moving around. They hadn't stayed in a town longer than 2 days so far. To top it off, Jiraiya had yet to teach him anything new while they had been walking, and Naruto had only been training his chakra control as they walked. There was one upside to this traveling. However, because Naruto was now sporting a very thick scroll filled with all the Ryu he had won from the casinos. Turns out he was incredibly lucky and almost never lost a bet he made. He had quickly started to amass Ryu so as to make sure he would be capable of paying for anything he wanted when he returned to Konoha. Alright, let's take a break, Naruto, Jiraiya said as he walked to the side of the path and sat down on a log. Naruto let the leaves moving around on his body to fall away and land on the path as he sat down next to Jiraiya. Jiraiya pulled out a few rice balls for them to snack on, handing 2 to Naruto, and they sat in comfortable silence. It was after they had finished their rice balls that Jiraiya reached into his pack again. I've decided to teach you another technique, Naruto, he said to Naruto's gleaming eyes. He chuckled. I promised you a new jutsu if you trained hard while I was away. I'd planned to be gone longer, but this mission came up and, after your recent mission mishap, I figured you could use a power jutsu. Jiraiya explained as he pulled out a bag of something that sounded like water. Naruto cocked his head in confusion. What are you going to teach me? He asked. Jiraiya smirked as he stood, moving over to a thick tree that was wilting. Watch closely, he said as he held his right hand out. Quickly, almost so fast Naruto couldn't see it, strands of chakra seemed to coalesce in Jiraiya's palm. All of these strands combined into a circular sphere as a thin layer of chakra appeared around them, The ball of chakra was glowing a bright blue. When the light of the ball stabilized, Jiraiya grinned as he brought his hand around, placing the ball of swirling chakra against the tree. Rasengan, 1. He said as the ball of chakra quickly ate away at the trunk of the tree before it completely destroyed it. Naruto's eyes went wide at the destructive power of such a jutsu should it connect with his opponent. On top of that, the jutsu seemingly used no hand signs, a plus if he ever fought a Genjutsu user. Jiraiya was smirking at Naruto as he tossed a balloon filled with water at him, watching Naruto catch it. The first phase to learning this is popping that water balloon. Get to work as we walk. Jiraiya said. A hint is to think about how the Rasengan formed. He supplied as he began walking away. Scene break. 5 days later, Naruto grunted in his hotel room as he tried to pop the water balloon. They had arrived in this town earlier the same day. So far, he had only managed to get the water to push against the edges of the balloon, stretching it obscenely one way or another. He had even managed to get the water to look almost like a disc, but the balloon never broke. He grumbled lightly about how Jiraiya was being such a pain about telling him anything else about this jutsu, claiming Naruto had to learn it for himself. Despite Jiraiya's initial hint, Naruto was still stumped about it. Sighing in frustration, Naruto thought about the Kyuubi and how odd it was that it hadn't made any comments since right before his bandit mission commenced. It had been eerily quiet as of late, and Naruto was beginning to worry that something might be wrong, either with the seal or the Kyuubi itself, neither of which boded well for Naruto. "Hey Kyuubi!" Naruto exclaimed as he had a few times before on his most recent trip. Waiting a few minutes, Naruto shook his head as Kyuubi failed to respond. His thoughts quickly turned back to the water balloon still sitting in his hands. He glared lightly at the offending ball of water inside the balloon, cursing it and wishing he knew how to make it pop. As he glared, he thought about the most destructive water he could think of, in an attempt to make the water burst from its confines. His mind wandered to his cup ramen and the boiling water he poured into it to become the food he had thought of as heaven for most of his life. It was this thought that brought an idea to Naruto. He quickly remembered the way the water was constantly shifting when it was boiling, rolling and shifting inside the pot before being removed from the heat. What would happen if he managed to create those many swirling patterns within the water himself? Would that cause the balloon to pop? Grinning excitedly, Naruto stood, moving to the center of the room, and put his thought into action, quickly swirling chakra into the balloon to get the water moving. He almost held his breath as he kept the chakra swirling while adding in another thread of chakra to swirl the water against the current now running through his balloon. Naruto waited with bated breath as he watched the balloon suddenly start spiking in different directions across all of its surfaces before exploding into a shower of water and rubber. Naruto blinked before a very wide smile spread across his face. "That's it! I did it!" he exclaimed as he grabbed another balloon and popped it using the same method. Exhilarated laughter rang out from his mouth as he popped another balloon, soaking the floor underneath him. Naruto wanted to quickly find out the next step to the jutsu, so he dried himself of the water that had splashed onto his skin before heading towards the door. He was going to search for Jiraiya to learn the next step, which meant he would probably be going to the nearest brothel. As Naruto approached the door, however, a knock on the door alerted him to possible visitors. Confusion was his initial response until he sensed the chakra signature of someone standing outside his door. He stepped back in surprise as he realized that this person's chakra felt odd. As he focused on the person, Naruto realized that the man was compressing a pool of chakra so big it made Jiraiya's and his own seem normal in comparison. Naruto had never felt such a large chakra pool before. The obvious feel of water was coming from it, marking the man as a very powerful water nature. To top it off, this man was obviously experienced in hiding his massive chakra signature, as Naruto hadn't sensed the man until he actually concentrated on him. A myriad of options ran through his head, trying to figure out what he would do when the knock sounded again. Naruto knew that the man outside knew he was in here because of his laughter mere moments before. Deciding quickly, Naruto slipped his sandals on as he pulled the door open. "Yes?" he asked as he quickly looked over the two men standing outside his room. "Shit. I can't even sense his partner," Naruto thought to himself as he looked at two men in black cloaks with red clouds on top of them. The first was taller than his counterpart by a full head, and the man's skin was an unhealthy shade of blue. The most obvious part of his face was the gill-like slits that covered his cheeks like Naruto's own whisker marks. This man also had a spiked blue hairstyle that made his hair look like a shark's fin. His beady little white eyes scanned Naruto and the surrounding room with a deceptive perception. The second was almost an older copy of Sasuke. The man had his Sharingan active, all three tomos swirling in his eyes as he stared at Naruto intensely. His black hair fell down to his cheeks, framing his face as the rest of his hair was in a ponytail behind him. The biggest difference from this man and Sasuke, however, was the black tear troughs that were below his eyes. Naruto immediately knew who this man was, and a thrill of fear ran through his body as he whispered the name that most in Konoha equated to the power of one of the Sannin, Uchiha Itachi. "Ah, he knows your name, Itachi," the big blue man said as he grinned. "But, is this kid really the QB?" he asks as he stares at Naruto. Naruto immediately took a step back, a defensive stance coming to the forefront of his terror-ridden mind. "Naruto-kun, we would like for you to come with us," Itachi said in a monotone as he stared at Naruto with an intensity Naruto had yet to meet. When Naruto didn't move, Itachi spoke again, a slightly hypnotic tone to his voice now. "Step out of the room." Naruto's eyes narrowed as he fought off an unquestionable urge to do as Itachi said. Through his muddled brain, Naruto managed to figure out that Itachi had just tried using those hypnotic powers of his famous Genjutsu. Naruto quickly broke eye contact with Itachi, focusing on the big blue man. "Now, why would I do that, Itachi-san?" Naruto asked rhetorically, his voice speaking of a courage he didn't feel. "We don't have time to waste. Maybe I should just cut off a leg, so he can't run away," the big blue man said as his arm came up, grasping the hilt of the massive sword on his back. Naruto trembled slightly but didn't back down. "Try it, fish face," Naruto taunted with a grin. Naruto idly wondered if he had gone insane when he realized there was no escape, and now he was antagonizing someone who could obviously rip him apart. "Don't let him get to you, Kisame," Itachi said in monotone. "Remember, he was trained by Kurenai-san and should not be underestimated," he warned. Kisame grinned, and Naruto had a sinking feeling in his gut. "Ah, that red-eyed Genjutsu using bitch that you kicked around?" he asked as if that were perfectly normal. The big man noticed how Naruto stiffened when Kurenai was mentioned. "Why should I be so afraid of someone trained by a bitch that couldn't even put up a fight when you beat the shit out of her Genjutsu?" he asked with a chuckle. He noticed Naruto's body shake once. "Is the little midget upset that your bitch of a sensei was hurt?" he taunted. Naruto's eyes were covered with his bangs. The hallway had fallen deathly silently as Itachi watched with a small amount of amusement in his eyes. "You hurt Kurenai-chan?" Naruto broke the silence. Kisame mistook the shaking of Naruto's body as fear as he smiled widely, deciding that tormenting the boy was more fun. "Of course we hurt the bitch. She tried to stop us from taking you," he said as he laughed darkly. Even Kisame's incredible reflexes couldn't save him from the burst of power that knocked him back and through 3 walls to fall the 3 stories onto the street behind the hotel they were in. Naruto's foot was still outstretched to where Kisame's stomach had been before. Itachi was watching his target closely as Naruto breathed heavily. An orange glow surrounded the young man. Naruto's eyes suddenly locked with Itachi's own, and 2 snarling foxes appeared next to Naruto, leaping at Itachi without hesitation. Naruto himself wasn't far behind. His kunai was ready to strike Itachi. But the man was not an S-rank shinobi for nothing, as he easily evaded the 2 beasts before evading Naruto. Down the hallway the 4 beings moved, Itachi dodging and sometimes blocking the attacks that Naruto and his conjured beasts launched. Naruto was quickly becoming frustrated with his lack of a hit on the man whom had hurt Kurenai when he felt Kisame appear down the hallway. His white eyes were shining with a murderous vengeance. Naruto, despite his enraged state, knew when he was beaten and silently hoped his plan worked. Apparently, Naruto was lucky as Jiraiya picked just then to appear in the hallway as well. It took but 1 moment for Itachi to notice the Sannin now preparing for battle as he turned to Kisame, whom was on the opposite side of the hallway from Jiraiya. "This battle is no longer in our favor. Come, Kisame," Itachi said as he turned, heading away from Jiraiya and towards Kisame. Naruto wanted to run after the man but knew that he was obviously out of his league, as his quick battle had confirmed. The foxes and orange glow disappeared from Naruto as Kisame's chakra signature disappeared from his sensor. He sighed in relief as he collapsed onto his ass in the middle of the hallway, his hands shaking. Jiraiya walked up next to him, looking down at him. Good thinking, Naruto. He complimented as he allowed the toad in his hand to return to the summon world. Sending a toad to warn me was the right plan, though I can't say I'm happy you used Kyuubi's chakra so readily. Naruto nodded. Damn, what a way to wake up. Looking into those cursed eyes again. Kyuubi commented from inside Naruto. Naruto blinked in surprise. Kyuubi? Where the hell have you been? I almost died and you were sleeping? Naruto asked outraged. Shut it, brat. It isn't my fault that you summoning me into a shadow clone drained me more than I thought and that I needed to rest while you were on that mission. It replied without any remorse. Naruto scoffed, letting the matter drop as he did have an explanation as to why Kyuubi hadn't been responding. What about Kurenai Jiraiya? Naruto asked. Kisame said that Itachi hurt her. Naruto's voice was tinged with urgency and worry. Jiraiya frowned as he looked at Naruto. This may be hard to accept, Naruto, but the mission takes precedence. As you well know, he said as he fixed a stern stare to Naruto. Naruto opened his mouth to retort and then closed it, slowly nodding. Jiraiya sighed sadly. I know this isn't easy, but you know what Kurenai would say if you abandoned a mission simply to check on her, he said. Naruto nodded again. Besides, despite how powerful Itachi is, Jiraiya winced slightly, realizing that his choice of words probably wasn't the best. I have confidence in Kurenai's skills, don't you? He asked. There's no way Kurenai-chan was taken down by someone who ran away from you, Naruto said with a small smile. Jiraiya chuckled slightly, but could tell Naruto was still a little worried. I suppose I should tell you that the woman we're tracking is one of the best healers in the elemental nations, Jiraiya mentioned. Naruto looked up, interested, and Jiraiya grinned knowingly as Naruto's worry was replaced with excitement. I finished the first stage, Jiraiya, Naruto said. Jiraiya blinked in slight surprise before. All right, I'll teach you the second step on our way to the next town. I have a lead that should allow us to find our target soon. Let's go, he said as he headed back towards their room. Scene break. It was hours later, as the traffic on the road increased, indicating they were approaching another town, when Jiraiya pulled out a red ball from his traveling pack. Naruto eyed it warily, as Jiraiya held it out to him. Naruto took the ball into his hand, tossing it up and cocking an eyebrow. Rubber this time? He asked. Jiraiya nodded. The first stage, as I'm sure you have figured out now, was all about rotation, taking your chakra and swirling it around a central point. Jiraiya explained as Naruto nodded. This step is focused on power. You need more power and concentration to be able to break the rubber ball than the water balloon. Jiraiya trailed off as he watched the rubber ball explode into bits of rubber. A grinning Naruto looking back at Jiraiya. Jiraiya twitched lightly before handing Naruto another rubber ball. Naruto immediately destroyed that ball as well, leaving Jiraiya well and truly dumbfounded as he looked at Naruto. Well, Jiraiya cleared his throat. I guess you managed the second stage. I don't have the materials to teach you the third stage, but just combine the first two and make a shell of chakra around it. I'll get you the training materials in town, Jiraiya said before mumbling to himself as they continued to walk into the town. Scene break. It was close to dinner time when Naruto and Jiraiya entered the outskirts of the village. With a simple glance, Jiraiya and Naruto decided they were going to eat before heading to wherever Naruto would be sleeping for the night. As Jiraiya was undoubtedly going to do some more research, it was as the two were approaching a combination bar and restaurant that a thought struck Naruto. Hey Jiraiya, you must have a picture of this healer we're looking for, right? He asked. Jiraiya's answering grin almost made Naruto wish he hadn't asked that specific question. Reaching into his own wallet, an action which surprised Naruto as the man had yet to pay for anything himself, instead allowing Naruto's outrageous casino winnings to pay for all of their expenses so far. Jiraiya slowly revealed the slightly worn picture almost as if it was a personal treasure. The picture showed a woman with blonde hair, light brown eyes, light skin, a purple diamond on her forehead and, if Naruto were being honest with himself, one of the prettiest faces and largest breasts he had ever seen, in pictures or with his own eyes. Naruto started when he noticed her breasts so readily but chalked it up to Jiraiya's recent explanation. Oddly enough, this woman's bust reminded him of that busted Genjutsu user from Kumo, Samui, whom he remembered because of how he couldn't seemingly tear his eyes away from her breasts. Back during the exams, he had wondered why he had become slightly distracted by her at first. But again, Jiraiya's explanation seemed to give him his answer. He sighed lightly, realizing he was going to have to discipline himself slightly as Jiraiya had warned him that most women hated to be stared at because of their looks. "Whatcha think?" Jiraiya asked with a grin, as if he knew what Naruto had been drawn to. To Naruto's credit, he didn't blush in embarrassment. "She's pretty," he said, to which Jiraiya beamed. "Kurenai-chan's better, but she's pretty," he said with a smirk. Jiraiya fell to the floor as if he had just been kicked in the back. Naruto chuckled slightly as he opened the door to the restaurant they had been walking towards, waiting for Jiraiya to pat himself off and send a glare in his direction as he walked past him. "What's her name?" Naruto asked as he walked into the restaurant himself, looking at Jiraiya's back. "Tsunade," Jiraiya stated in shock. Naruto raised an eyebrow in question that didn't make any sense. Why would the woman in the picture have the same name as Jiraiya's teammate? Damn it, I'm an idiot. Of course we would be searching for the legendary third Sannin as a healer. Though, I wonder why he sounds so shocked, and why we are searching for her. Naruto thought to himself. "Jiraiya?" said a melodious female voice from further in the restaurant. Naruto blinked as he stepped around his master to face the woman whose picture he had just been presented. He blinked again as he saw that she was much younger than he expected, looking almost like Kurenai's age. She was wearing a gray kimono shirt, which he couldn't help but notice didn't hide her cleavage much, nor the green diamond-like necklace hanging from her neck, with a green robe covering her arms and shoulders. Sitting next to her was another pretty woman. This time the woman had black hair and eyes, wearing a bluish-black kimono with white trimmings. Naruto didn't recognize her from any pictures he had ever seen. "Finally found you," Jiraiya said next to him as he motioned for Naruto to join the two kunoichi sitting in a booth. A tense silence fell across the table as the food was ordered and delivered. Naruto watched as Jiraiya and Tsunade seemed to have a staring contest, and the lady sitting next to Tsunade looked between the two anxiously. Deciding he couldn't do anything, Naruto proceeded to eat his ordered food with a quiet dignity. "Another shows up to remind me of bad memories," Tsunade finally commented as she lifted her sake saucer to her lips, smacking them after she had drained the liquid. "Orochimaru? What did he want?" Jiraiya asked, intrigued. Naruto saw the black-haired lady twitch. Her eyes flickered over to Tsunade. Naruto barely caught the answering stare from Tsunade, as quick as her eyes flashed to the lady then back to Jiraiya. "Nothing important, just to chat," she replied as she waved her hand as if that were a common occurrence. Thinking back, Naruto shivered slightly as he thought about being in the snake summoner's presence for too long. "Why'd you come see me?" she asked back as she set her sake dish down on the table. Naruto glanced at Jiraiya. In hindsight, Naruto realized he hadn't been told anything about why they were actually retrieving Tsunade. Of course, he hadn't even known they were tracking the third Sannin until over 3 weeks into the mission, so Naruto didn't know much about the mission from the beginning. Unfortunately, Naruto knew that something was going to be happening if Konoha was finally recalling its third most powerful shinobi, most powerful kunoichi, and by far its best and most knowledgeable healer. So far as Naruto knew, Tsunade had been free to stay away from Konoha for close to 20 years. Now, the village was recalling her. Something must be going on. "I wish I could say this was just a pleasure visit," Jiraiya trailed off as the suggestiveness left his voice. "But Sarutobi-sensei is recalling you to Konoha," he said with all of the authority that Naruto knew he possessed as Konoha's second most powerful shinobi and spy master. The surprise on Tsunade's face was as easily readable as Jiraiya's apparent perversion when the man wasn't being completely serious. Naruto noted that the other woman was obviously surprised as well. The question why was floating on the tip of Naruto's tongue, but he kept his mouth shut as he waited for an answer and the outcome of Jiraiya's words and mission. "Why?" Tsunade finally asked. Jiraiya leaned forward, his fingers laced together as he fixed Tsunade with one of the most serious gazes Naruto had ever seen his master use. He told me not to say why, but it's undoubtedly because he is getting older. He trailed off as if uncomfortable with that thought. He was almost killed by Orochimaru during their fight, and the fact that the Raikage didn't take advantage of that is a miracle, he said as Tsunade scoffed in what seemed to be derision. That phrase also hit Naruto hard as he realized how close his Gigi had been to becoming one of the casualties of the invasion. Short as it was, Naruto hadn't even considered the fact that, even if the Raikage had been fighting with the Hokage to defeat Orochimaru, as it seemed they had been, that the Raikage could have still turned around and killed the Hokage if he had been fit enough. He had made that same mistake with Yujito, albeit on a smaller level, yet he had still made that mistake. Naruto resolved that he would not trust a foreign shinobi so easily again. Jiraiya continued speaking as Naruto's revelation took place. Naruto barely heard the man. I'm rather sure that he wishes for you to become the Godame. He's getting too old for the job, and he knows he can't hold the position until someone of my apprentice's age can take the hat. The 2 generations after us were hurt by the Kyuubi's attack, and we're the only ones left with the potential, Jiraiya explained as he waved at Naruto. Naruto blinked slightly and realized that Jiraiya and the Hokage were indirectly indicating that his generation was the strongest since the Sannin themselves. Tsunade, for the first time, looked at Naruto with slight curiosity. And? Who's this Gaki? She asked as if he hadn't been sitting there since Jiraiya had sat down. Though Naruto loathed using a line Sasuke had before, he couldn't help but to put a little bit of spite into his words as he looked at the half-drunken gaze of Tsunade. He cut Jiraiya off before he could respond. It's polite to introduce yourself first, you old hag. Naruto responded, glaring slightly at the jab to his age. Naruto always got rankled when his age or height was mentioned, something Jiraiya noted he was going to have to work on. Tsunade returned his glare full force despite her drunkenness. What did you say, you blonde-haired shrimp? She said despite his recent growth spurt. Naruto twitched himself, but Jiraiya cut in before the two could get too far into their verbal banter. He's my apprentice, Uzumaki Naruto, he said. Naruto noticed the look of recognition that passed across Tsunade and her accomplice's face. He also noticed that the other lady was now looking at him with slight pity. He quickly schooled his face so the displeasure he felt could be hidden as he sat back, deciding he was no longer hungry. But what is your answer, Tsunade? Will you come back to Konoha? Jiraiya asked. That tense silence was back as soon as the words fell from Jiraiya's lips. Naruto watched as Tsunade seemed to consider the offer. Her eyes were unreadable to Naruto, so he flicked his attention over to the dark-haired lady, and she was pretty easy for him to pick out the worry and slight fear that laced her eyes as she watched Tsunade closely. As the stretch of silence continued, Naruto could see that fear increasing, as well as a hint of confusion appearing in the woman's face as Tsunade took her time in answering Jiraiya. So, Jiraiya finally said as Tsunade took another saucer of sake to her lips. Tsunade drank her saucer and smacked her lips before fixing Jiraiya with a stare. Impossible. I refuse, she said to Naruto's surprise, Jiraiya's sigh, and the other woman's obvious discomfort. I remember you answering me the same way when I used to ask you out, Jiraiya said as if he hadn't just heard her refuse a direct order from the Hokage. Naruto glanced at Jiraiya, who looked incredibly relaxed as he smiled lightly. Such memories, he murmured. You know, Jiraiya, Naruto said, bringing the attention of the table to himself. You shouldn't act as if she hasn't just refused to listen to the order of her commanding officer, Naruto mentioned quietly. Jiraiya shot Naruto a look. And you definitely shouldn't be the one lecturing me or Tsunade about that. Naruto did have the sense to look slightly mollified by that, but he still held Jiraiya's gaze. Don't worry, Naruto, she's going to come back because she knows, and so do you, that she's the only one who can be the Godame, he says as he glances back to Tsunade. Tsunade scoffed. I wouldn't return for the job of a fool, she said derisively as Naruto's head whipped to her. What do you mean by that? Naruto asked. His voice had gained that frosty tone that Jiraiya was now familiar with. Jiraiya smirked slightly behind his laced fingers. Tsunade took another drink of her sake before responding to Naruto's glare. I mean, that the Hokage's position is one which requires you to gamble with your life, she said as she stared right into his eyes with a glare of her own. Only a fool gambles with their lives so recklessly like my grandfather, granduncle, and the fourth. They all tried to bring peace and died before they could reach their dreams, just like all of the other losers. She took another drink of the sake. Even Sarutobi-sensei is risking his life when he should be retired. Naruto felt his anger flare as he glared at the last Sannin of Konoha. He couldn't believe this was what Tsunade thought of the Hokage position he thought so highly of. "You've changed, Tsunade," Jiraiya commented as Naruto continued to glare at her. "Well, I'm in my 50s, Jiraiya. Age changes people," Tsunade answered flippantly. Naruto could feel Jiraiya was as incensed as he was, especially with that comment about Sarutobi. "I'll say it one last time so you'll leave me alone. The Hokage is a fool's job and only an idiot would become Hokage," she said forcefully as she slammed her saucer down on the table. Naruto wished nothing more than to jump across the table and attempt to strangle Tsunade, but he managed to contain himself as he glared at the woman he had read was one of the greatest kunoichi to have ever graced the elemental nations. "You're lucky we're in a bar, Obasan," Naruto said. Heat was rolling off of his voice as he saw Jiraiya turn to regard him and Tsunade's eye twitched. "Because you would find yourself in a world of hurt if I could attack you right now." Naruto's voice was low, threatening, and it held an undertone of power that had Jiraiya and the dark-haired lady blinking in slight surprise. "Oh," Tsunade said as she smiled in amusement from Naruto's words. "You've got some guts to be saying shit like that, boy," Tsunade said as she returned Naruto's glare. "And you're a coward who can do nothing but badmouth dead men or men who are 40 years your senior," Naruto retorted. Tsunade's face colored slightly. "Let's take this outside," Tsunade said, and Naruto didn't wait more than a second as he calmly stood from his seat, heading towards the door with his back to Tsunade. Naruto and Tsunade stood in the middle of the street as the civilians surrounding them hurried off, each of them recognizing a shinobi standoff easily. Jiraiya and Shizune both stood off to the side, Shizune with a worried expression and Jiraiya with a curious one. Naruto was sizing up Tsunade with his usual calculating gaze, obviously taking this fight much more serious than Tsunade, whom was looking down at Naruto as if the fight was already over. "I'm part of the Sannin, little boy," Tsunade said as she shook her head dismissively of Naruto, whom grit his teeth in annoyance. "I don't even have to be serious when fighting you," she said with a grin at Naruto. Naruto shifted in his stance, staring down Tsunade with an ever-increasing urge to try to shove her words down her throat when Jiraiya spoke. "Tsunade-heim, you really shouldn't underestimate him," he warned. Naruto's dark gaze lightened as he heard Jiraiya's confidence in his ability to put even a Sannin on her guard. "Unfortunately," Tsunade scoffed, "as if the brat barely deserves one finger," she said as she held her right pointer finger up. Naruto's gaze darkened again as he glared at his opponent. "And that's all I'm going to use on you," she said, fixating her gaze back on Naruto. "Tsunade-sama," Shizune said warningly, as if she had something to say, but Naruto's burst of action cut her off. Naruto had already released his weights. No weight remained on his legs as he knew he was as outclassed as he possibly could be. Despite this, Tsunade's words incensed Naruto's anger. Though Naruto didn't go about spouting his wish to become Hokage to anyone who would listen any longer, he was still aiming for the title. His initial goal of attaining the title for purely recognition reasons had faded to be replaced by the desire and drive to protect those precious to him, and, to a lesser extent, to be recognized as one of the strongest shinobis to have walked in Konoha's walls ever, even with Genjutsu as his main jutsu branch. Tsunade's words of complete disregard for the sacrifice of the previous Hokages coupled with her lack of respect for the power and decisions that they had made was a direct insult to the men and title that he respected above almost all else. The fact she was related to two of them and had been trained by a third was a fact that further pushed Naruto's rage of how she could talk so callously about those whom she must have considered family and friends. As a result, Naruto's actions were fueled by an anger that raged in his mind. Naruto became acutely aware of his surroundings and his actions. He could see how Tsunade braced herself as he rushed forward. His hand reached down and quickly brought out two shurikens. Flinging them at Tsunade, Naruto's hand was already reaching back for his kunai as he watched Tsunade move the barest amount she could to dodge his attack. This brought the information he knew about Tsunade to the forefront of his mind, and he cursed his initial plan of attack. Naruto knew that Tsunade was a medical ninja, and the basic of any medical ninja was to be capable of dodging almost anything sent at them because, if they were hurt, their purpose for being on the team was null and void. It also reminded him of the thing that most of the shinobi outside of Konoha feared, Tsunade's super strength technique using perfect chakra control. It was little surprise to Naruto when Tsunade ducked under his kunai attack, seemingly effortlessly as she quickly disarmed him, and then proceeded to flick his kunai up, knocking his headband off of his head in the process. He blinked when Tsunade appeared in front of him, her finger pulled back by her thumb and aimed at his forehead. His eyes widened as Tsunade smirked. Her finger flew, and with it went Naruto as her technique sent him tumbling back down the road and into the side of another building. Naruto coughed as he felt blood dribble down the side of his head. Again, he cursed his choice of attack as he heard Kyubi chuckling malevolently in his head. "Foolish brat, in your anger you forgot your precious information. Your teacher would be so disappointed in you right now." The Kyubi chuckled again as it enjoyed the sense of disappointment coming from Naruto as he knew the truth of what Kyubi was saying. Kurenai would be the first to scold him for his rash action. "Since you will probably pass out soon," Tsunade said as she looked at Naruto, her gaze turned curious. "I want to know why you reacted so strongly to what I said." Naruto scoffed as he pushed himself forward. Out of the rubble and feeling his head swim, he spoke to give himself a bit of time. "Unlike you, I believe in the title of Hokage," he said as he put a hand against his temple to stop his head from throbbing. "I believe in the power and the decisions that the previous ones have made." Naruto ignored the fact that he didn't really agree with what his Gigi did with him as he spoke. "And I'll uphold that title because I'll become Hokage one day." Tsunade's eyes unfocused, as if she was no longer seeing what was in front of her. Naruto noticed this and quickly set his plan into motion. Running through hand seals as fast as he could manage. "Futon Kamaitashi," he said as he blew out the large amount of air he had inhaled. Nearly invisible blades of wind sliced through the air as they headed towards Tsunade. Naruto wasted no time in sending his next attack as he drew more shuriken, feeling his blades of wind through his sensor, and flung his shuriken behind his attack in an attempt to cover the entire street in deadly blades. Naruto, Shizune, and Jiraiya watched with anticipation as the blades closed in on Tsunade, whom was still unresponsive. The blades were quickly closing in on Tsunade and had almost reached her when she seemed to realize what was happening and suddenly flicked the ground with her finger, causing an entire part of the street to rise up and block her from the oncoming assault. Her momentary lapse in attention seemed to anger her as she immediately flicked her makeshift wall, sending large chunks of rock hurtling towards Naruto. Naruto evaded the oncoming flying rocks and looked over at Tsunade to see her charging him. He quickly deduced that attempting to flee wouldn't result in anything other than him being caught with his back to her. As a result, he quickly took stock of the jutsu he could attempt in the very small window that might cause her to pause in her attempt to attack him and end this very unfair fight. He discarded the two-wind jutsu as something that would only serve to aggravate her further and knew that his hair jutsu wouldn't do much more than cause minor irritation to an experienced shinobi of her caliber. This left him with but one option, but Naruto was very unwilling to try it considering he had only trained for it for close to 2 minutes so far. He sighed mentally as he saw Tsunade closing the distance faster than he would like and concentrated on his chakra flow. "I need to maintain my power while compressing everything within a balloon of my chakra," Naruto thought as he held his hand out, his other coming atop it and rapidly hitting the air above his palm. His eyes snapped open as he kept one eye on the still attacking Tsunade and the other on his palms. He grit his teeth as he felt his chakra begin to push against the layer of chakra he had put around his spinning chakra. "Maintain it. Don't let the swirling out or the power will reduce," he thought to himself as he watched the ball of chakra glow dully with the many strands of chakra swirling inside it. He also noticed that Tsunade's eyes widened slightly as she saw the jutsu he was attempting. Naruto turned his attention back to his jutsu and could feel the strain on his balloon of chakra increase, but it was holding steady. Naruto was grimacing in effort but could feel he was almost at the point where he could hold his Rasengan when the balloon of chakra began to collapse. At the same time, Tsunade reached down and placed her finger on the ground, causing Naruto's balance to falter. Naruto quickly leaped into the air, his arm extending forward to thrust his rapidly failing Rasengan towards the sluggish Sannin. Tsunade moved back almost as soon as Naruto jumped forward, and Naruto inwardly cursed as he felt his hand grind into the ground slightly before his jutsu dissipated. Naruto raised himself off the ground and looked up at Tsunade, whom was looking at him with a calculating look before looking away as a grimace of derision crossed her face. "Jiraiya!" she barked as she fixed her self-confident gaze on his master. "Are you the one who's trying to teach this kid the Rasengan?" she asked as if it was a joke she couldn't comprehend. Jiraiya's countenance changed slightly. His eyes narrowed and his lips pressed together as he looked into Tsunade's drunken gaze. "The only people who can use that jutsu are you and the fourth," she said, sobering slightly when mentioning Konoha's greatest hero. "Trying to teach him something he could never actually manage and calling yourself his master?" Tsunade barked out a laugh that was as mirthless as Jiraiya's face now looked. Shizun's face was actually locked on Naruto's icy cold blue eyes as he glared frostily at Tsunade. "You shouldn't fill silly kids' heads with foolish dreams about becoming Hokage." Instead of Naruto responding, Jiraiya beat him to the punch. "You really shouldn't insult my apprentice," he said. The previous tones of affection and mirth had disappeared, and Naruto was given his second glimpse of the true ninja that hid underneath Jiraiya's many masks. Naruto couldn't deny the shiver of respect and slight fear that ran through him as he looked over at his master. "He will master Rasengan in another few days, Tsunade. You can bet on that," he said. The contempt he stressed on the word bet was not lost on anyone standing in the street. Tsunade blinked in what seemed to be surprise as she looked at Jiraiya. Her eyes darted back to Naruto and took note of how he wasn't even paying attention to her anymore. His gaze locked on his master. "Humph. Those are some big words, Jiraiya," she said as she scoffed, though she had lost some of her bluster. "Fine then, let's make it a bet," Naruto said, looking grimly at Tsunade with a glint in his eyes that had Jiraiya smirking despite the way he was feeling. Tsunade turned to Naruto with a raised brow. "I bet I can finish the Rasengan by sunrise 2 days from now," he said as he stared straight into Tsunade's eyes. "Be careful, brat. A man's word should never be taken back," she taunted, his bluster returning while she wasn't dealing with Jiraiya's serious gaze. Naruto grinned maliciously. "I won't ever take back my words," he stated. Tsunade looked down at Naruto with a calculating gaze yet again before smirking. "Okay then, brat. I'll give you the 3 days that your master says you need, and if you manage to master that jutsu, I'll acknowledge that I was wrong about the previous Hokages and return to Konoha," she said as Naruto blinked. "I'll even give you this necklace," she said, holding up the greenish-blue crystal hanging on her impressive bust. "Tsunade-sama, that's your precious memento from your grandfather," Shizun exclaimed. Naruto's eyes gleamed as he deduced that the necklace was the Shodame's. "Quiet, Shizun," Tsunade barked to her acquaintance. "But if you lose," Tsunade said as she grinned at Naruto, "then you and Jiraiya act like you never found me or Shizun and I get all of your money, brat," she said as she held up a fairly empty frog wallet. "You're on." Naruto grinned. Tsunade smirked and Shizun looked like she still wanted to object, but Jiraiya stepped in. "Why don't you and Shizun go find us a hotel, Naruto?" he said as he walked up next to Tsunade. "And we can go get a drink, Tsunade," he smiled at his teammate before. "For old time's sake," he added as Tsunade closed her mouth and nodded. Scene break. Naruto and Shizun left Jiraiya and Tsunade at the crossroads of the town while leaving their master's directions to the hotel they planned on using. It didn't take long for Naruto and Shizun to acquire 2 separate rooms at the hotel. Naruto entered his own room without a look back despite the fact he felt Shizun's gaze upon his back, her room across from his own. Naruto sighed softly as he heard the door shut behind him. "What is it you want, Shizun-san?" he asked tiredly. He had actually spent a bit of energy in training before fighting Tsunade. It hadn't left him exhausted, nor even tired, just a bit weary of doing anything beyond taking a nice long bath before sleeping. "Excuse me for coming over like this, but I don't want you to misunderstand Tsunade-sama," Shizun said forcefully. Naruto twitched slightly as he turned around to fix Shizun with a slightly frosty glare. "And what exactly?" Speaking slowly and stressing his words purposefully. "Should I not misunderstand?" he asked with some heat in his voice. Shizun didn't falter a second as her gaze intensified. "Tsunade-sama is not what you think her to be," she commented, which caused Naruto to narrow his eyes. Also, you shouldn't take that necklace. Why not? He asked. Naruto was intrigued by what Shizen had to say about the necklace. Seeing his intense gaze had lessened in its apparent hostility, Shizen continued, Tsunade-sama was not always like this. Shizen paused as if remembering a treasured memory. She used to have a caring heart and loved the village, but that all changed on that day. Shizen stopped and her face twisted into a grim frown as she recalled whatever had happened. Tsunade-sama's dreams, hopes and love were all lost on that day. Shizen said. The dramatic effect of the silence that followed Shizen's statement struck Naruto as quite impressive. That still doesn't explain why I shouldn't take the necklace, Naruto commented, as it seemed Shizen wasn't intent on continuing. Acting as Naruto had hoped, Shizen's slightly glazed eyes returned their focus to him, her story continuing. To Tsunade-sama, that necklace is as important to her as her own life is. It isn't something that should be bet on so carelessly, she said, causing Naruto to wonder why a woman who said that those who bet their lives were fools when she went and bet on something so sentimental to her on him. Besides that necklace is cursed, Naruto, Shizen said, and she seemed to shiver as she looked through him again. Naruto frowned. That necklace doesn't acknowledge anyone other than Tsunade, and anyone else who wears it will inevitably end up dead, Shizen declared. Naruto blinked before a look of doubt crossed his face. Shizen quickly noticed this because she spoke before he could declare his own feelings on such a ridiculous notion. Tsunade-sama had a little brother, Nawaki. Shizen started, catching Naruto's reluctant attention. He always used to boast about being Hokage, and Tsunade-sama believed in him, as well as the title of Hokage back then. Again, Shizen paused to build effect. Naruto was sure. She was very close to her brother and loved him dearly. The day of his 12th birthday, Tsunade-sama presented Nawaki with the very same necklace she now wears. It wasn't even 10 hours later that Nawaki was severely injured and was declared killed in action. Shizen paused again, taking in Naruto's stony expression, but she could see he was listening a bit more intently now. She got her necklace back and began to push for Konoha to train a medic corps for shinobi and assign each 4-member squad to have one trained medic with them for all missions to lessen the mortality rate. It was during one of her proposals that she met my Uncle Dan. Shizen looked away for a moment before continuing. The tone of pain that had entered her voice was not unnoticed by Naruto. He agreed with her plan and supported her in her endeavors, but Sandaime-sama told her that they didn't have the time or money necessary to train a medic corps during the middle of the war, so she was left angry that her idea was dismissed so readily. But my uncle managed to calm her and they became close. Sighing slightly, Shizen took a deep breath. I don't know why, but something that my uncle told Tsunade-sama must have struck her, because right before a mission my uncle took, Tsunade gifted him with that same necklace, and just like with her younger brother, my uncle was dead within 24 hours of receiving that necklace. That was when Tsunade-sama changed. She paused again, turning to regard Naruto again. Can you understand that, Naruto? That Tsunade-sama has been struggling since she left, she said softly. Her answer was in the form of a brilliant blue ball of chakra to form in Naruto's hand. Shizen blinked in surprise as she looked at the completed Rasengan in Naruto's hand, glowing much brighter than the one he had tried to use against Tsunade. The clone standing next to Naruto was the obvious reason he was having such an easy time of completing his jutsu for the first time. Tsunade-san lost her bet the moment she made it with me, Naruto let his jutsu dispel. While I respect what Tsunade-san has lost, that doesn't excuse her behavior, nor does it excuse her words about men who gave their lives so others, her included, could continue to live. Shizen looked ready to argue, but Naruto silenced her with another frosty glare. I listened to your story so I could better understand her, like you wanted, he pointed out, making Shizen nod. Now, I need to train tomorrow, so please leave, he said, motioning her towards the exit. Shizen seemed confused at Naruto's dismissal but turned and left the room, obviously dissatisfied about how Naruto had reacted to her story. Once she left, Naruto let out a sigh and ran his fingers through his hair. I guess she has had it a bit rough, but I can't just let her slide for what she said, he whispered to himself before standing and getting ready for bed, intent on allowing his training to present the answer to his problem. Scene break. Naruto huffed as he looked at the demolished tree in front of him. He had finally managed to complete a Rasengan using only one hand after 2 days of intense chakra control and shape training. Despite how easy he had made it seem with his clone, the truth was that the Rasengan was an incredibly taxing technique on one's concentration. It required the utmost coordination of rotation and power combined with an intense condensation of chakra. He was proud of his training, but one thing was still bothering him. Naruto sighed as he fell back and landed on the soft ground he had been using to train. He still hadn't figured out what he was going to do in regards to Tsunade. He felt for her, losing her little brother. Then her love to that necklace and their way of life must have been very troubling. Naruto thought about losing Kurenai or Shikamaru to a mission, and he could feel the rage and despair that would consume in him. That was one problem with being capable of reading people like most Genjutsu users were capable of. You generally placed yourself in your opponent's shoes to gain a foothold into which types of Genjutsu would work best against them. It actually led to many Genjutsu types being compassionate or frigid. Although, thinking about it, what exactly was he supposed to do for Tsunade anyways? He needed her back in Konoha in case any of his friends or Kurenai got hurt, and his Gigi certainly wasn't getting any younger. However, he couldn't think of any other way of getting Tsunade to come with them peacefully without beating her in the bed. Sighing softly, Naruto looked at the black sky with tired eyes and decided he would be spending the night on the comfortable ground once again before heading back tomorrow morning. Scene break. Naruto was woken as he felt Jiraiya's chakra land in his training space. Looking over at his master, Naruto's eyes widened as he looked at Jiraiya's labored breathing. Naruto stood up, stretching slightly as he felt his chakra reserves replenished and his aches from training yesterday was gone. He moved to Jiraiya's side quickly. "What happened?" he asked. Jiraiya grunted as he leaned against Naruto. "Shizune," he shuddered. "She managed to get me with one of those weakening poisons." He explained through deep breaths. "We need to follow them, Naruto? Think you can track them?" he asked as he shuddered again. Naruto frowned. "Probably. But what's the point if you can't fight? I can't take Tsunade without some help," he responded. Jiraiya grunted again. "I'll be back to full strength by the time you find them," he said before pausing again. "Probably," he added as he looked at Naruto's doubting gaze. "Look, even if we can't fight them, we can follow them until I get better. Let's go," he said as Naruto grudgingly lifted his much heavier master onto his back before closing his eyes and concentrating on his sensor. "Go towards the east. There are 3 chakra signatures facing off and 1 chakra signature is heading towards them," Kyuubi commented from inside its cage. Naruto blinked, having forgotten about Kyuubi before sending his hesitant thanks to the great beast and heading towards where he faintly sensed the same chakra signatures. Scene break. It didn't take Naruto long to get close enough to the chakras that Kyuubi had told him about to identify 3 of them. "Jiraiya," he said, gaining a slight groan from his still incapacitated master. "Tsunade and Shizune are facing off against 2 others." That got more than a grunt as Jiraiya raised his head from Naruto's shoulder. "One of them is a chakra signature I recognized from the Chunin exams. His name was Kabuto." Jiraiya shook his head, showing he didn't know who that was. Naruto turned his attention back to the hill they were about to crest when he felt Tsunade's chakra fluctuate erratically. Naruto burst forward, cresting the hill as he observed Shizune protecting Tsunade from Kabuto's attacks while someone, whom sent a deep growl rumbling through Naruto's body, watched with a gleeful look. Naruto registered how Tsunade was sprawled on the ground with a horrified look on her face as he moved up to Tsunade and Shizune's position with all of the stealth he held with Jiraiya on his back. Naruto was trying to take stock of the situation when he saw Shizune's ankle get caught in Kabuto's grip. When Shizune landed, she crumbled to the ground without any support, as if her leg was no longer capable of holding her weight. Naruto quickly set Jiraiya down, noticing the man was no longer shivering before dashing out from his rock, managing to land a vicious kick to the side of Kabuto's chest and sending him flying towards his apparent partner. It took a few moments for the shinobi now standing before Naruto could react to his sudden intrusion. The sudden bloodthirsty grins that appeared in both Orochimaru's and Kabuto's faces was evident. "Ah, Naruto-kun," Kabuto said as he picked himself up from the ground. Naruto didn't share the sentiment as he glared down his opponents. Kabuto was wearing the same clothes that he had during the Chunin exams with one glaring difference: the musical symbol note that was engraved on his headband as opposed to the swirl that was Konoha's. denoting that he was actually a sound shinobi. Orochimaru was wearing plain gray garbs with black pants, a thick purple tied in a bow on his lower back and blue tomo earrings. He had yellow, reptilian slit-like eyes, and pale white skin with two glaring problems with his visage. One of these problems had Naruto blinking in surprise as he looked at the man who had caused his first experience with the Kyuubi. Naruto looked at his fingers before looking back at Orochimaru. Orochimaru's grin had disappeared, replaced with a vicious-looking sneer. On top of that, Kabuto was glancing nervously back at Orochimaru as Shizune and Jiraiya looked on with curious glances. The questions on their minds were answered when Naruto smirked. "Heh, cool," he said as he flexed his fingers. "That's so cool that I actually managed to leave a mark on Orochimaru," Naruto said with an obvious taunt. Orochimaru's face twisted again as he glared at Naruto. His eyes narrowed and only enhanced the 4 red claw marks that marked his face. The second mark was the badly burnt left arm of Orochimaru's, one which looked like it had been encased in lightning chakra. It was obvious to those there that Orochimaru was severely handicapped when compared to his normal strength. "It's been a while, Orochimaru," Jiraiya said as he approached from behind Naruto. Shizune had crawled to her master, pulling out a handkerchief and dabbing at the woman's blood-covered face. Naruto's grin slowly faded as he watched the two legendary shinobi gaze at each other, with Kabuto watching as if the standoff was amusing, much like his master from minutes before. "Ah, Jiraiya," Orochimaru said as he grinned. "So, the stupid one finally appears," he taunted. Jiraiya shrugged it off. "You know me, Orochimaru, always showing up late," he said as he grinned foolishly. "But this fight won't end the same as all the other times, Orochimaru." Jiraiya's grin vanished, replaced with a seriousness that Naruto was not expecting. "Oh really?" Orochimaru said with some surprise. "You mean you think that you can beat myself and Kabuto even while you're recovering from that poison you were slipped? Come now, even you aren't that stupid," Orochimaru said. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. "Now who said anything about me fighting both you and Kabuto?" he asked. Upon Orochimaru's slightly surprised expression, Jiraiya continued, "I think Kabuto is going to have his hands full just trying to stay alive." Kabuto and Orochimaru both looked over at Tsunade and Shizune, as if expecting one of them to be rejoining the battle. They both raised an eyebrow as they saw both medic ninja out for the rest of the fight as Shizune was still healing and cleaning Tsunade. That was when Naruto stepped forward, standing next to Jiraiya. Orochimaru's amused expression was only eclipsed by Kabuto's own. "Are you serious, Jiraiya?" Orochimaru asked, laughing darkly. "Naruto-kun is not capable of even giving Kabuto a decent workout." Naruto's answering glare was accompanied by Jiraiya's response. "I thought you were supposed to be a genius, Orochimaru," he said with a frown. "Don't you learn from your mistakes?" he asked to Orochimaru's slowly slipping smile. "After all, the last time you underestimated Naruto, he managed to harm you more than most others," he said as Naruto's glare turned into a feral smirk, his eyes shining. This time it was Kabuto's turn. "Naruto-kun may have been able to harm Orochimaru-sama, but that doesn't mean anything," he said as he looked down upon Naruto. "Even the prey can get in a lucky strike before the predator manages to strike the final blow," he commented. Naruto's smirk widened slightly. "I evaluated you, Naruto-kun, during the Chunin exams," he said to Naruto's narrowed eyes. "Would you like to know what I determined?" he asks. Kabuto shrugs his shoulders. "I determined that you have very little talent as a shinobi." Naruto grit his teeth as he glared at his supposed opponent. "Right now, you are nothing more than an out-of-place Chunin who relies on that monster inside you," Kabuto said with a smirk and a deadly glint in his eyes. "With the 3 legendary ninjas in front of me, you are nothing more than a simple annoyance that a rabbit may bring. A rabbit with a small bite, but a rabbit nonetheless." Kabuto sighed again as he reached up and pushed up his glasses. "If you try anything, I'll kill you," he said. A glint had entered his eyes that Naruto hadn't seen before, but Naruto was undeterred. "Brat," Kyuubi said as Naruto sent a feeling of acknowledgement. "Take this Ningin's words and shove them down his throat. The little bastard has no right to be looking down upon my container," Kyuubi said. The indignation that filled the great beast's voice was reflected in Naruto's glare. Only Shizun saw Tsunade's eyes slowly focus upon Naruto's form, taking in his stance and the glare he was sending his opponent. Tsunade's eyes morphed from their dead, listless look to one of slight curiosity as Naruto whispered to the wind, "Fox. I am a fox." Jiraiya smirked, and even Orochimaru's evil grin reflected the legendary ninja's thoughts upon his response to Kabuto's taunting. "I leave him to you then, Naruto," Jiraiya said as he moved forward towards Orochimaru, obviously hampered from his poisoning. Kabuto pushed his eyeglasses up, a habit that his enemies quickly took note of as he moved to intercept Jiraiya's charge. Tsunade's widened eyes and Shizun's slight gasp were the quickest responses to Naruto as he appeared in front of Kabuto, spinning in a kick resulting in him knocking the medic ninja almost 30 yards with a single kick. "Didn't you hear the old pervert?" Naruto asked with the hint of a grin as he moved towards where Kabuto was picking himself up from his ungraceful landing. "Your fight is with me. Don't go rushing off, thinking you can turn your back on me." Kabuto locked gazes with Naruto. A glint of promised pain lingered in Kabuto's gaze as he looked at Naruto. "So, you can only learn something once it has been proven, Naruto-kun. You disappoint me," he retorted as he activated his chakra scalpels once again and rushed forward. Naruto, inwardly, knew his speed was nowhere near Kabuto's now that the man was actually considering him a threat. It was one of the only reasons he had been capable of landing the 2 surprise hits he had. It was little surprise to Naruto that he saw Kabuto almost blur out of his sight as he quickly ran through hand seals. The whisper of "Futon de Tapa" accompanied the harsh winds that suddenly picked up and blasted forward towards the rushing Kabuto. Kabuto quickly changed his direction, heading to his left and dodging the blast of wind as quickly as possible. Kabuto was given no time to resume his rush. However, as Naruto's next attack was launched, Hari Jigaku, Naruto intoned as he hunched forward slightly, peppering the field Kabuto had just occupied with blonde needles. Kabuto noticed that he would not be capable of escaping the fast Senbon-like needles and ducked behind a large boulder that was near his position. Naruto canceled his jutsu, straightening his back and looking around the field carefully, knowing that Kabuto was going to attack as soon as he could to go help his master. The man didn't disappoint as he appeared a few feet to the left of the blonde behind a boulder. Unfortunately for Kabuto, he wasn't capable of keeping his chakra concealed in such close proximity to Naruto with how much Naruto was concentrating. As a result, when Kabuto attempted to launch his attack, he was caught in the air with a full force, Futon Kaimitachi. The medic nin's eyes widened as he recognized the attack before raising his arms up to block the attack. Naruto smirked as he watched his blades of wind slice into Kabuto. The fact that the man had been so ready to disregard his accomplishments was an insult Naruto didn't take lightly. While he doubted he could actually beat Kabuto, he was aiming to give the man a good fight while he waited for either Jiraiya to beat Orochimaru or Tsunade to finally snap out of whatever was keeping her watching his fight. Naruto's smirk faded quickly when he noticed the smoke and heard the log clatter to the floor that signified Kabuto's successful use of his replacement. Naruto felt a hand brush his left leg, resulting in Naruto plummeting to his knee as he looked at Kabuto's smirking face before him. "I really want to knock that stupid grin off his face. The fact that he's like twice my age and been trained by a fucking Sannin doesn't have any reason why he's capable of hurting me so easily, is it, you fucking prick?" Naruto thought to himself as he glared up at his opponent. "Do you see, Naruto-kun?" Kabuto said, that arrogant tone back in his voice along with a small tinge of disappointment. "You're nothing when compared to the people around you. You should run away when you can. At least that way you can live to complete your goals, right?" Kabuto asked that infuriating smile back on his face. Naruto's glare only intensified as he felt his bloodline healing whatever it was Kabuto had managed to do to his leg. Kabuto shook his head as he looked at Naruto. Those eyes will only dash. It was at this point that Naruto took to his feet again, summoning 9 clones to his aid. 3 rushed forward immediately, trying to surprise his opponent. Scene break. Tsunade blinked in surprise as she completely ignored the fight between her old teammates. She could feel Shizun's comforting hand on her shoulder and the concerned glance that she was sending around the area, but Tsunade's attention was locked upon Naruto. While Naruto was not quite as outspoken as her little brother or Dan had been, the look in his eyes were what had her shivering in her memories. She could see Nawaki as he grinned up at her after receiving the necklace that lay upon her neck. She could remember Dan standing up for her idea in front of the third as her sole supporter in the crowd that listened to her pleading. Most of all, she could see the same look of protectiveness that they both had shared, that was now shared with the young man in front of her. He wasn't fighting this man simply because he insulted him. No, Naruto was fighting Kabuto because Naruto realized that this man was a threat to Konoha and, by extension, those whom he held precious. It was that burning look in his eyes that reminded her of her little brother and her lover. It was that burning look that reminded her of the will of fire that her precious people had carried before they were taken from her, and it was this remembrance that had her eyes glued to his fight, despite the blood staining her clothes. She was no longer shivering from the red blood. She was shivering because of her ghosts. Ghosts she saw personified by the young man in front of her. It was impressive that the young man had lasted this long so far. She had been fighting Kabuto before the others arrived and, though she had dismissed him, he was not an opponent to take lightly for most. But she saw through what Naruto was doing, and she was sure that Kabuto did too, for the man easily bypassed Naruto's attacks. She wasn't surprised when Kabuto rose from the ground after his replacement, easily severing a major muscle group and taunted Naruto. She was surprised when Naruto glared back at the man who obviously had him at his mercy. She would be lying if she said she had known Naruto could heal such an injury without medical jutsu. However, the fact remained she was now watching almost 10 Narutos move in a mass confusion of dark gray as 3 swarmed Kabuto and 3 others tried to put some distance between themselves and their enemy. It was little surprise when Kabuto moved past the rushing clones and struck out at the fleeing Narutos, flinging 3 kunai towards their backs. 2 puffs of smoke along with a sharp grunt of pain signaled Kabuto's and Tsunade's instincts correct. Scene break. Once again, Kabuto advanced on the down genin, who was holding an injured leg. Smart move, Naruto. Kabuto praised as he looked down at his opponent. 2 of Naruto's clones dispersed as the other 5 seemed to just watch in wariness. Trying to keep your distance from me in order to avoid my chakra scalpels. Truly, an admirable attempt by one such as you, but ultimately laughable, he said as he pushed his glasses up on his nose once again. 1. He was unprepared for the smirk that the bleeding Naruto was now sporting as he felt a sense of slight fear enter his senses. Kabuto was alerted to the ruse of Naruto's plan when the smirking Naruto vanished, its job complete, as Kabuto turned and was met with a shining ball of blue chakra that was spinning madly in Naruto's outstretched palm. Kabuto had no time to use any of his techniques as the ball of chakra made contact with his chest, ripping and shredding his clothing and the better part of his ribcage before he could even scream. Rasengan, Naruto shouted as his ball of chakra ground even further into his enemy, the very ground cratering under the immense pressure put against it. The attack was mere seconds in execution. From the moment the ball of spinning chakra landed upon Kabuto's chest to the moment Naruto stood from his crouched position after his attack was a meager 3 seconds. Yet, those precious seconds had led to a mutilated Kabuto, whose eyes were staring up at Naruto unseeingly, a crater almost respectable enough to be Tsunade's, and the complete halt of Orochimaru and Jiraiya's fight. Naruto's words to the seemingly deceased Kabuto were heard clearly. "Who said I was trying to stay away from you?" he asked as if the very idea was laughable. "I was just luring you in for that attack, you traitorous bastard." Thus, Naruto turned his back upon the unmoving body and began to make his way, slightly shaking, up the crater he had made. Naruto crested his crater, looking at the plains surrounding him. He quickly noticed that he was the center of attention for the 3 legendary ninja of Konoha. It didn't take long before the 3 snapped into action. Orochimaru's eyes narrowed as he lashed out, striking Jiraiya's hastily put-together guard and sending the man crashing into the ground opposite where Naruto was. Orochimaru wasted no time in leaping from his snake. Heading towards Naruto at speeds Naruto quickly realized outmatched his on such a level Naruto could barely see the blur that was the snake Sannin. He knew that the Sannin was coming for him as he watched the man's flight. He also knew that he wasn't capable of dodging the man or outrunning him at this point, so he used his only defensive jutsu, Hari Jizo. As Naruto's blonde hair covered him, Naruto could only hope this jutsu was enough to divert some of the damage that Orochimaru was planning. It was to both of the men's surprise when Tsunade appeared out of nowhere. Her legendary super strength was certainly proven, as the crack Naruto heard from Orochimaru's mouth was definitely not a normal thing. As if to further Naruto's own observations, Orochimaru flew and crashed into the ground, almost on top of Kabuto's crater, and the resulting crater was obviously bigger than Kabuto's. "Enough, Orochimaru. I refuse to help you," Tsunade said. No trembling was visible on her body, even though she still had blood from before staining her shirt. Orochimaru stood from his crater, his elongated tongue shortening back into his mouth as he glared at Tsunade and Naruto. "There are still other ways I can heal myself, Tsunade. The leaf will burn," he said with an almost hiss-like snarl as he moved to where Kabuto was at, only to pick up his groaning body, much to Naruto and Tsunade's surprise. "I will get you back for this, boy. Count on that," Orochimaru warned Naruto before sinking into the ground and fading from Naruto's senses. Naruto turned from where Orochimaru had been, looking at Tsunade with a raised eyebrow as she faced him. Jiraiya and Shizune moved towards the two of them as the small stare-down occurred. "Impressive show, Naruto," Tsunade said as she paused before saying his name. Naruto looked into her eyes, wondering what had changed for her to actually compliment when she had been so ready to degrade him before today. "I have rarely seen someone so easily fool an opponent so far out of their class that managed to actually kill their opponent," she smirked. "Or, come that close to killing them," she added as she looked at the crater Naruto had made. Naruto smiled lightly as he nodded to Tsunade's small smile. "While you failed to kill him, the man was taught his lesson harshly enough. Make sure you kill him next time, brat," Kyubi said as it faded into his mindscape. "Will do, Kyubi," Naruto responded. Tsunade reached up, grabbing the necklace around her neck and unclasping it. She smiled a small bit wider as she looked at it before walking forward and gesturing for him to raise his hair. Naruto was a bit surprised when she leaned forward, obviously giving him a good look down her loose shirt, and fastened the necklace around his own neck. "You've earned this," she said as she leaned forward a bit before placing a small kiss on his forehead, causing Naruto to stiffen slightly and the blush that had taken over his face when he had averted his eyes from her bust to increase. "Just this one time more, please," Tsunade whispered. It was so low Naruto was almost sure he wasn't supposed to hear this, as Tsunade pulled away to smile teasingly at his red face. He smiled reassuringly as he flipped his hair back down his back and placed the necklace in full view on his chest. There was a very comforting silence that covered the four shinobi standing in the middle of a plain of destruction. Jiraiya was smiling at Naruto, obviously very proud of how Naruto had handled his opponent and his tactics in use. Tsunade was smiling down at Naruto, though her slightly glazed eyes said that she wasn't looking at just Naruto, a fist clenching on her chest as she stood there. Looking surprised, Shizune was the one whom seemed most out of place in the group, as she transferred her gaze from her master and Naruto in regular intervals, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Naruto himself was smiling lightly as he noticed Jiraiya's own smile, and seeing Tsunade no longer simply crying when she reminisced about her. He assumed, brother and lover. Their moment was brought to an end as a part of a boulder crashed to the floor behind Naruto, and the four shinobi spared a glance before their smiles resumed. "Good job, Naruto," Jiraiya said as he placed a hand on his shoulder. "You lasted longer than I thought against Kabuto," he admitted. Naruto scoffed. "Lasted longer? Come on now," you could easily see he was overconfident. "Every time he thinks he has the upper hand, he drops his guard," Naruto commented. "The fact he had a bloodline that makes him capable of surviving a direct Rasengan does mean he can take a lot of damage, but that doesn't mean he should be so careless." Naruto frowned, before his smirk returned. "Besides, what were you doing with Orochimaru? Playing footsies or something? The guy couldn't use any jutsu. You should have been able to mop the floor with him," Naruto retorted. "Hey, that poison Shizune used was more potent than I thought. It hampered me more than normal," Jiraiya responded, affronted. Naruto wasted no time in replying. "What did you expect from the only apprentice of the greatest medic in the elemental countries, you idiot?" he asked. At this, Shizune blushed slightly as Tsunade chuckled as she looked at the two arguing almost like they were brothers instead of master and apprentice. Naruto smirked, showing Jiraiya he didn't mean anything he said as he watched Jiraiya's lips twitch upwards. "So, How was fighting Orochimaru after all this time? He asked curiously. Jiraiya seemed surprised by this question. Why do you ask? He countered. Naruto shrugged. I managed to hurt the traitor. Normally, I wouldn't be capable of that, so I have to wonder if he's losing his touch, or if I really am just that lucky, he said. Jiraiya chuckled. Naruto, I don't think you need to ask that. He made an obvious gesture to where Naruto's money was sealed, and Naruto smiled sheepishly. And, he seems as well as he can be with one of his arms out of commission. Naruto nodded. But I can turn that same question back on you. What was it like fighting Sasuke? He asked. Jiraiya almost immediately wished he hadn't at the dark look that passed on Naruto's face. While Jiraiya knew what had happened during the fight, he had yet to be able to talk to Naruto about it. He also doubted Kurenai had talked about it during their mission. So, the responsibility fell to him to see how Naruto felt about it and deal with it accordingly. Naruto felt his rage return as he thought about how Sasuke had plunged a Chidori through his jutsu and took out most of his side. While Naruto may have put him in a rather detestable Genjutsu, that did not constitute using an A-rank assassination jutsu on his comrade, much less his own teammate. Tsunade and Shizen were both watching on, confused as Naruto replied lowly. It was fine until he plunged that fucking Chidori through me. He seriously needs to be checked by Yamanaka-san before he should do more missions, Naruto admitted, and seeing Jiraiya about to pry more, continued, I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust him as a teammate again, but I won't be able to take any missions with him until he has had a mental checkup. I know I wasn't being very nice with the Megan Narakumi no Jutsu, but I needed to ensure he would be out of the fight until Gaara was down, he said. Jiraiya nodded. I'd retort that he wasn't trying to hurt you intentionally, but he was aiming for your heart, so I can't defend him. He admitted to Tsunade and Shizen's slight shock. I'm surprised you're so calm about it, but your attitude is a good position, he said as he laid his hand back on Naruto's shoulder before turning to Tsunade. Did your teammate really try to kill you only because you put him in a genjutsu? Shizen asked. Her voice was extremely soft, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Well, I would expect it was because he was losing combined with the genjutsu, but yes, he did try to kill me with a jutsu his sensei taught him, Naruto said somberly. Tsunade's eyes burned with an inner fire as she asked, What do you mean his sensei? Shouldn't his sensei be yours? She asked, ignoring the fact that Jiraiya was Naruto's master at this point. Naruto's countenance darkened slightly again as he responded, Kakashi taught me nothing. Only Kurenai-sensei and Jiraiya have taught me something I didn't already know, so. No, his sensei is not mine and I won't call him sensei, he said. Tsunade and Shizen both blinked in slight surprise and Jiraiya stepped in, figuring they had learned enough about Naruto. Well, let's get a room for tonight and we can head back to Konoha tomorrow morning, he said, which received 3 nods, and 4 puffs of smoke later, the 4 shinobi disappeared.